For 2,000 years, Christian art has been getting cherubim completely wrong. In the Jewish Bible, they serve as fearsome guardians of sacred spaces, like the Jerusalem Temple and the Garden of Eden. They are certainly not chubby children with wings. It seems that the cultural context behind the cherubim in their various Old Testament appearances was completely forgotten by the time Christianity began. That changed when archaeologists began excavating the ancient ruins of the Near East in the 19th and 20th centuries, revealing a wealth of iconography and symbolism that had been lost to history. Thanks to their hard work, we finally know what the cherubim were and how they fit into the religion of the ancient Israelites. In this video, I'll examine what the Bible says about cherubim, discuss the archaeological evidence, and then explain how cherubim functioned in the ancient world. I'm especially indebted to Alice Wood's 2008 monograph on the cherubim, titled Of Wings and Wheels, for this video. There are 91 references in the Hebrew Bible to a creature called a cherub, cherubim in the plural. Few of these references refer to its physical appearance, and the most common feature that does get mentioned is its wings. Cherubim images feature prominently in descriptions of sacred architecture and furnishings. According to 1 Kings, gilded relief carvings of cherubim together with palm trees and flowers decorated the walls and doors of the Solomonic Temple. In the court, there were wheeled bronze cultic stands that also featured decorative cherubim together with lions and bulls. And most importantly, the inner sanctuary of the temple contained two enormous cherub statues, 10 cubits high. They were positioned on either side of the Ark of the Covenant, protecting it with their wings. The Ark of the Covenant itself is famously described in Exodus as having two golden cherub statues on its golden lid. Similar to the temple, the wilderness tabernacle in Exodus is described as having cherubim designs on the walls and curtains. Even though the tabernacle is widely regarded by scholars as an invention of the post-exilic priestly writers, it almost certainly reflects the Jerusalem temple furnishings to some degree. The presence of cherubim in the temple is probably linked to one of Yahweh's main epithets, which is variously translated as enthroned on the cherubim or dweller of the cherubim. The exact meaning of the phrase, which lacks a preposition, is debated. Nevertheless, it seems that Yahweh and his cherubim are often a package deal in the Hebrew Bible. Wherever he goes, they go. In the exilic book of Ezekiel, the prophet's visions of the new temple continue to emphasize the importance of cherubim. Ezekiel specifies in chapter 41 that on the walls of the inner sanctuary and the walls outside the sanctuary, there was to be a pattern consisting of palm trees flanked by cherubim. As we shall see later, this was a fairly common decorative motif in Near Eastern temples and palaces. There are also several passages where cherubim are described as real heavenly beings, and not just as statues and decorative elements. At the end of the Garden of Eden story in Genesis 3, Yahweh stations some cherubim to the east of the garden to guard the way to the Tree of Life. There is an interesting parallel here to the temple sanctuary, whose entrance would have been on the eastern side. Alice Wood, in her book on the cherubim, explains, "The cherubim serve as the guardians of the boundary between two realms. If we associate the Garden of Eden with the temple and the tabernacle, then we can compare the cherubim in Genesis 3:24 to the cherubim that occur as architectural features of the temple. In each case, the cherubim are boundary markers and guardians of what is sacred." The link between cherubim and Eden is seen again in Ezekiel 28. This text is actually an oracle addressed to the king of Tyre, but it uses Eden situated on a mountain as its metaphorical setting. Verses 14 and 16, which are difficult to interpret, state either that the king was a cherub or that he was with a cherub. The Old Greek translation makes the latter view explicit. In either case, the cherub is described as Eden's guardian in verse 16. Furthermore, the poetic parallelism in this passage appears to equate the king/cherub with a signet seal, and other language in the poem alludes to the craftsmanship of Phoenician artisans. According to Wood's summary of several studies on this passage, we may be dealing with a semantic cluster of ideas that associate kingship and the protective power of seals and amulets with the divinely ordained function of cherubs as guardians of sacred spaces. Another important mention of a cherub can be found in the Song of David, a poem that is found both in 2 Samuel 22 and in Psalm 18. It describes Yahweh as riding a flying cherub from heaven to come to the psalmist's rescue. The poem is rich in mythological elements, including storm god imagery in which the deity wields lightning bolts as a weapon. It's also interesting that Yahweh hears the psalmist's cries of distress in the temple, which of course contain cherubim. Several of Ezekiel's visions include cherubim as living creatures rather than mere temple decorations. The first one occurs in Ezekiel 9, which says that the glory of God went up from the cherub upon which it had been to the entryway of the temple. Chapter 10 contains further mentions of a singular cherub in some verses and multiple cherubim in others. Since these chapters have been heavily edited and are notoriously difficult to interpret, I won't dwell on them too much. For Ezekiel, the cherubim seem to function both as guardians of Yahweh's temple and as symbols of Yahweh's omnipotence, who carry his throne to the Judean exiles. Now, even though the cherubim of the ark and the temple are inanimate objects created by artisans, the Bible's authors seem to believe that those statues possessed real apotropaic functionality. In Exodus 25, Yahweh physically dwells inside the space bounded by the two cherubim on the ark's cover. And in 1 Kings 8, the cherubim shield and protect the sacred space of the inner sanctuary with their wings. Wood concludes that shielding the presence of the deity is the primary function of the golden cherubim statues. For centuries, biblical exegetes had little information to go on about what exactly cherubim were supposed to be. In modern times, however, Near Eastern archaeology has revolutionized our understanding of the Bible and its cultural context. When Sir Austin Henry Layard excavated the Assyrian city of Nineveh, for example, he uncovered massive stone statues of hybrid guardian creatures with eagle wings, human heads, and the bodies of lions and bulls. At the same time, Assyrian texts were being discovered that mentioned some kind of mythical being called a Karibu or Kuribu. In a 1923 book on the Babylonian creation epic, Assyriologist Stephen Langdon proposed that the terms Karibu and Kuribu, which might mean something like one who prays, referred to the monster statues found at Assyrian temples and palaces. Furthermore, they seem to share the same word root as the Hebrew kerub or cherub. In 1926, another Assyriologist, Edouard Dorme, published a text that described a pair of Kuribu gods placed in the innermost holy sanctuary of the temple to the god Ashur. A full translation has never been published, but the excerpt translated by Dorme says, "I covered the cypress wood doors, which smell good, with gold inlay and reinforced the door leaves. I covered the dwelling of Ashur my lord with gold. I set up Lameh gods and Kuribi gods in vermeil on either side. Inside the naos of Assur, my lord, I set up golden statues, on the right and on the left." It's easy to see how this description of an inner temple sanctuary guarded by two golden Kuribu statues resembles the Jerusalem sanctuary with its two cherub statues. Archaeologists now know that the Assyrian winged creatures discovered by Layard were more generally called Shedu and Lamassu. But there is still general agreement that the Kuribu was some kind of protective deity, and that the word is indeed linked with the Hebrew cherub. According to Wood, the Akkadian linguistic evidence highlights the apotropaic qualities of the cherubim, and Dorme's belief that the Kuribu specifically described the guardian statues of the temple's innermost sanctuary may still be correct. Since then, excavations throughout Israel and the Near East have brought to light an enormous amount of ancient iconography depicting weird and wonderful creatures of all types. However, these images are rarely labeled, and determining which ones denote cherubs has been a challenge. As Wood puts it, the abundance of winged, supernatural beings depicted on ancient Near Eastern seals, plaques, and figurines, together with the absence of any label reading "This is a cherub," means that we are overwhelmed with comparative material. The approach that Wood takes to identifying cherubim in her book is to first establish a visual profile based on the biblical texts, giving more weight to texts believed to be older. This profile includes not only the physical form of cherubim, but also the contexts in which they appear and the purposes they fulfill. The profile she proposes is as follows. Cherubim are supernatural winged beings most likely to be quadrupedal. Cherubim may be hybrid creatures that include human, leonine, bovine, and/or aquiline features. Cherubim often occur in pairs as sentinels and can appear together with sacred trees, lions, and oxen in cultic contexts. Cherubim may appear on signets due to their apotropaic function. cherubim may be used by a deity as transport. Wood's study focuses on artifacts from ancient Israel and Judah, but finds from other locations are also taken into account where appropriate. The majority of objects studied range in dates from the late 10th to the 4th century BCE. The artifacts she examines include the Megiddo ivories, which consist of a wide variety of ornamental plaques and other objects found at Megiddo in northern Israel, as well as the Tanakh cult stands, the Sumerian ivories, various objects from Hazor, a cave drawing from Jerusalem, and innumerable stamp and cylinder seals. The results of her analysis show that two types of winged beings conform closely to the profile of biblical cherubim. They are winged lions with the heads of either humans or eagles. In other words, cherub is the term used in biblical Hebrew to describe sphinxes and griffins. There was also a third variant with a ram's head, but the rarity of this design suggests that it was not prominent in Israelite and Judahite iconography. Wood's survey confirms what was already a widely held scholarly view. William Albright proposed back in 1938 that the cherub was a winged sphinx, a lion with a human head, and several scholars since then have suggested that the griffin, a winged lion with the head of a falcon or eagle, could also be a type of cherub. Both sphinxes and griffins were incredibly common in Near Eastern art from the Bronze Age to the Persian period. Interestingly, a few scholars also think that the ancient Greek word for griffin, groups, may be derived from the same word as the Hebrew cherub and the Akkadian karibu. This word was the ancestor of Latin gryphus and the English griffin. Both the griffin and the sphinx appear to be Egyptian in origin, and in general, the iconography of ancient Phoenicia, Israel, and Judah was highly influenced by Egyptian symbolism. The Egyptians regarded the lion in its various forms as the guardian of boundaries, and we find images of sphinxes and griffins with leonine bodies throughout the Near East, guarding the sacred precincts of temples, just as cherubs guarded the Jerusalem temple and the tabernacle. Yes, this does mean that all those wonderful paintings and models of the Ark of the Covenant, including the one from Indiana Jones, are wrong. There should not be two winged humans on the lid, but two winged sphinxes or griffins. Throughout the ancient world, hybrid creatures were seen as the guardians of boundaries between realms. In Greek mythology, the Cerberus is a dog-snake hybrid who guards the gates of the underworld. The Egyptian underworld of Duat was guarded by a lion-hippopotamus-crocodile hybrid called Amit. Throughout the Near East and Greece, sphinxes guarded the sacred precincts of temples. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gates of the sun god Shamash are guarded by scorpion men. Hybrid creatures are so pervasive in Near Eastern art that archaeologists have adopted a technical name for them, Mischwesen, from the German word for hybrid. In the delightful book God's Monsters, Esther J. Hamori explains why hybrid monsters are so often assigned to guardian roles in ancient mythology. Composite creatures appear often in both mythology and iconography as guardians for the gods. There's logic to this. The fiercest creatures should serve as guardians for the gods, and what could be fiercer than a monster composed from the most powerful parts of other creatures? The raw strength and ferocity of a lion, the talons or wings of an eagle, capped off with that lethal asset, the intellect represented by the head of a human being. With such dangerous parts, these composite monsters were the most menacing guards imaginable. That's why we always find cherubim guarding these thresholds in the Bible. Whether it is the temple's sacred sanctuary, the lid of the ark, the forbidden Garden of Eden, or God's own throne room in heaven. In the minds of the Israelites, the various rituals, the cultic preparations, and the construction of cherubim guardians that were necessary in order for the temple to function as Yahweh's abode were not a pretense. They weren't just statues and wall decorations, they were living monsters that really existed and really guarded Yahweh. Just as the Assyrian god Ninurta rode through the sky on a winged lion with a scorpion tail named Abubu, Yahweh's own cherubim hybrids could carry him across the heavens and rain destruction upon his foes. Ezekiel's visions should make that clear. In Near Eastern iconography, there are important connections between cherubim, sacred trees, and goddesses. Some of these relationships are fairly clear in the Bible as well, while others have left only echoes in the biblical text. One of the most common visual motifs in the Near East is a scene in which a sacred tree is flanked either by caprids or by sphinxes and griffins, just like the designs in Solomon's temple and Ezekiel's vision. The Bible's description of Eden with the tree of life guarded by cherubim should come to mind as well. Sometimes, the trees shown in this context represent fertility or a sacred space, like a temple. Other times, they represent the king or a goddess, such as the Canaanite/Israelite goddess Asherah. See, for example, this design engraved into a silver bowl found in Syria, just outside of Israel. It features a motif of sacred trees flanked by both sphinxes and griffins. This jug from Lachish in southern Canaan depicts two ibexes flanking a sacred tree with an inscription addressed to Asherah. This cult stand from Tanakh, Israel, depicts alternating lions and cherubs as well as caprids flanking a sacred tree. The tree is generally thought to represent the goddess Asherah. A second, more ornate cult stand, also from Tanakh, includes both Asherah and the tree together with rows of guardian lions and cherubs. This Mitanni seal shows a four-winged goddess on the upper frieze and a sacred tree right below her flanked by caprids and cherubs. This ivory carving from Nimrud also features the motif of sacred trees flanked by caprids and sphinxes, along with flowers, just as Solomon's temple sanctuary is described. The artifacts from Zavia in northwestern Persia include this golden plaque depicting sacred trees guarded by sphinxes and griffins. There were also ivory plaques depicting sphinxes, palm trees, and flowers, once again just like how the Jerusalem temple is described. A remarkable painting from the royal palace at Mari is quite reminiscent of Eden, with rivers and a sacred tree guarded by sphinxes and griffins. Professor Nicholas Wyatt, a specialist in Near Eastern mythology at the University of Edinburgh, remarks, "All the motifs here present, the trees, the rivers, the divine figures, the king robed, and the sphinxes and griffins, which will trigger responses in the reader familiar with the biblical narrative, were already clichés in Marian and wider ancient Near Eastern iconography. They occurred widely on cylinder seals, on statuary and reliefs, and in derivative forms throughout the ancient Near East over a protracted period of time, and wherever found, their significance was not simply decorative, but ideological." Archaeologist Thierry Petit agrees that the description of cherubim in Genesis 3:24 represents the same widespread Levantine motif of sphinxes guarding the tree of life. He notes that in the Levant, sphinxes were also often shown beside the Ankh symbol, which means life, and could be equivalent to both the tree of life and the name Eve, which means life in Hebrew. Petit further argues that societies in the ancient Levant underwent a process of pantheon reduction that resulted in each polity worshipping one dominant god and goddess pair. In nearly every case, the sphinx or cherub seems to have become an essential servant of the goddess as a privileged hypostasis. Petit remarks, "Indeed, in imagery, the sphinx most often appears linked to the female deity. In Syria in particular, it is both guardian of the tree of life and companion of the goddess. It can even symbolize her at times." A wonderful example of the cherub's association with the feminine divine can be seen in the ruins of the temple to Ishtar at Ain Dara in Syria. This temple was very similar to Solomon's in its overall design, and its entrances were guarded by magnificent carvings of cherubs and lions. Asherah as the consort of Yahweh was an important part of early Israelite religion, and we have examples of the same iconographic motifs being applied to Asherah. For example, this Asherah figurine from late Bronze Age Canaan includes the sacred tree motif. This stamp from Beit Shean, Israel, associates a seated deity, El or possibly Yahweh, with a tree that represents Asherah flanked by a griffin and caprid. This famous jar from Kuntlet Adrud in Judah shows the sacred tree motif along with an inscription that declares a blessing before Yahweh and Asherah. However, as Judah underwent more extreme pantheon reduction and eliminated the goddess Asherah from its official religion, cherubs and sacred trees came to be associated with Yahweh instead. As a result, although the first two elements, the Sphinx and the tree, are still found combined iconographically, they are now most often integrated into a Yahwist context. This is why, as we have seen, they are found in the decoration of the Temple of Jerusalem. They flank the throne of Yahweh, who sits on the cherubim. Thus, the plant motif was gradually absorbed into the religion of Israel. In short, the cherub in Judahite religion became a bearer of Yahweh's divinity that granted access to the Tree of Life, a concept that underlies both the Garden of Eden story and the design of the Jerusalem temple. I'll have more to say on Asherah and her connection with the Tree of Life and ancient Israelite religion in future videos. Hybrid creatures called mishvasin were an integral part of Near Eastern religion and art for thousands of years. hybrids that combined the parts of powerful creatures like lions, eagles, and bulls in particular, became regarded as guardians of sacred boundaries. A wealth of archaeological evidence confirms that the cherubim of the Hebrew Bible were most likely winged sphinxes and griffins who guarded the temple and Yahweh himself. They could serve as transport for Yahweh to and from heaven, and they were closely linked with the Tree of Life, an ancient motif found throughout the Near East. As a result, they were an integral part of the Jerusalem temple as well as the tabernacle and ark, as described in the biblical narrative. Evidence found throughout the Levant suggests that cherubim and sacred trees were at one time closely associated with goddess veneration. The transfer of their symbolism to Yahweh likely occurred in the context of the eventual rejection of the goddess Asherah in the official religion of Judah.